Hello guys. Today we'll talk about the population of four countries: Malaysia, Australia, Cambodia, and New Zealand. About the Malaysia, the figure from uh, above 10 million increased to over 3 million in 2019. And Australia is from um, 14 million to near 25 million people in 2019, and about Cambodia was 3 million people, and in 2019 is more than 50 million people. And the last one is New Zealand, from under 5 million in 1970 to almost 5 million people in 2019. And you can see this is the board of GDP of Australia. The gross domestic product GDP in Australia was worth 1,322 92.70 billion US dollar in 2019, according to official data from the World Bank and projection from trading economies. The GDP value of Australia presents 1.16% of the world economy. The wealthy country Australia has a market economy, a high GDP per capita, and a relatively low rate of poverty. In terms of average wealth, Australia ranked second in the world after Switzerland from 2013 until Australia poverty rate increased from 10.2% to 11.8% from 2000 January to 2013, ranked fifth in Index of Economic Freedom 2017. Australia in the world 14th largest economy and has the 10th highest per capita GDP, nominal at 55 and 692 cents dollar. The country has ranked third in the United Nations 2017 Human Development Index. Melbourne reached top spot for the fourth year in a row on the Economist's 2014 list of world's most livable cities. Total government debt in Australia is about 190 billion to 20% of GDP in 2010. Australia has among the highest house prices and some of the highest household debt level in the world. Since 2008, inflation has typically been 2 to 3%, and the base interest rate 5 to 6%. The service sector of economy include tourism, education, and financial service accounts for about 70% of GDP. Australia is a major exporter of agricultural products, particularly wheat and wool, minerals such as iron ore and gold, and engineering in the form of liquefied natural gas and coal, although agriculture and natural resources account of 3% and 5% of GDP respectively, they contribute substantially to export performance. And the next is about the New Zealand GDP. Well, the GDP in New Zealand was worth uh, 2,100, I'm sorry, 206.93 billion US dollar in 2019, according to official data from the World Bank and projections from Trading Economics. The GDP value of Zealand represents 1.17% of the world economy. The economy of New Zealand is a highly developed free market economy. It is the 51st largest national economy in the world when measured by nominal gross domestic product (GDP) and the 67th largest in the world when measured by purchasing power parity (PPP). New Zealand has a large GDP for its size and population. The country has one of the most globalized economies and depends greatly on international trade, mainly with Australia, the European Union, the United States, China, South Korea, Japan, and Canada. New Zealand's 1983 Closer Economy Relation Agreement with Australia means that the economy aligns closely with that of Australia. New Zealand's diverse economy has a sizable services sector accounting for 63% of all GDP. Activity as of 2013, large-scale manufacturing industries include aluminum production, food processing, metal fabrication, wood and paper products, mining, manufacturing, electricity, gas, water, and waste service accounted for 60.5% of GDP as of 2013. The primary sector continued to dominate New Zealand export, despite accounting for only 6.5% of GDP as of 2013. The information technology sector is growing rapidly. And next is about the part of Malaysia GDP. The gross domestic product GDP in Malaysia was worth 364.70 billion US dollar in 2019, according to official data from the World Bank. The GDP value of Malaysia presents uh, 1.3% of the world economy. Malaysia's annual gross domestic product growth moderated to 4.3% in 2019, the lowest level since the global financial crisis in 2009. The country's fourth quarter of 2019 for Q19 GDP growth slowed to 3.6%, which is the lowest in 41 quarters since 3Q09, according to Bank Negara Malaysia stated statistic released today. The economy had grown 5.9% and 5.1% during the SARS outbreak in 2003 and MERS in 2015, respectively. However, the growth was affected by supply disruptions in commodity, uh, commodity-related sector and contraction in public investment activity. For the fourth quarter of 2019, the local economy slowed to 3.6% from 4.4% recorded a year ago. And the last one is Cambodia, GDP. The GDP in Cambodia was what? 27.09 billion US dollar in 2019, according to official data from the World Bank and projections from trading economies. The GDP value of Cambodia represents 1.02% of the world economy. The economy of Cambodia currently follows an open bank system and has seen rapid economic process in the last decade. Cambodia had a GDP of 24.57 billion in 2018. The Cambodia Central Bank said economic growth remains robust so far this year, and the forecast that gross domestic product will expand by 7.1% in 2019. And the next is about the consumption of four countries. Australia private consumption account for 55% of its nominal GDP in March 2020, compared with a ratio of 55.6% in previous quarter. Australia's private consumption contribution to nominal GDP ratio is updated quarterly, available from Sept 1970 to March 2020, with an average share of 56.9%. The data reached an on-time high of 61.8% in March 1983 and record low of 51.2% in date 1973. CEIC calculates private consumption as percentage of nominal GDP from quarterly private consumption, expenditure, and quarterly nominal GDP. Consumer spending in Australia decreased to 949 AUD millions in the first quarter of 2020, from 269 and 23 AUD million in fourth quarter of 2019. In the latest report, Australia GDP expands 1.4 billion percent YoY in March 2020. Uh, Australia's nominal GDP reached um, reached 300 and 43.6 USD billion in 2019. Its GDP deflator increased 1.7% in March 2020. Australia GDP per capita reached 55 thousand and 305.8 USD in June 2019. Its cross-saving rate was measured at 25.6% in March 2020. About New Zealand's private consumption accounted for 54.7% of its nominal GDP in March 2020, compared with the ratio of 57.4% in the previous quarter. New Zealand private consumption contribution to a nominal GDP ratio in updated quality available from June 1987 to March 2020, with an average share of 58%. The data reached an on-time high of 64 or 64.4% in September 1993, and a record low of 52.4% in March 2002. CEIC calculate private consumption as a percentage of nominal GDP from quarterly private consumption expenditure and quarterly nominal GDP. Statistics New Zealand provide private consumption expenditure in local currencies and nominal GDP in local currency. In the latest report, New Zealand's GDP expanded 1.6% YoY in December 2019. New Zealand's nominal GDP reached 50.2 USD billion in March 2020. Its GDP deflator increased 3.9% in March 2020. New Zealand's GDP per capita reached 41,096 USD in March 2020. Its cross-saving rate was measured at 26.6% in March 2020. Final consumption expenditure in New Zealand was reported at 76.45% in 2016, according to World Bank, a collection of developed indicator complied from official recognized resources. New Zealand final consumption expenditure, actual value, historical data, forecast and projection were sourced from the World Bank on August of 2020. And about the Malaysia general government final consumption expenditure annual percent growth in Malaysia was reported at 2.047% in 2019, according to the World Bank collection of developed indicators comply from official recognized sources. Uh, in the general government final expression in Cambodia was reported at 5.783% in 2019, according to the World Bank collection of developed indicators compiled from officially recognized sources. And in 2019, the private consumption growth uh, growth amount of 4.8% from 2021. It was forecast that the private consumption growth in Cambodia will reach approximately 5.1%. And the second thing is government spending. About Australia, government spending in Australia increased to 96,125 AUD million in the first quarter of 2020 from 94,471 AUD million in the fourth quarter of 2019. You can see the board of the Australia government spending. In New Zealand, government spending in New Zealand average 8,156.833 NGD million from 1987 until 2020, reaching an all-time high of 12,445 million in the fourth quarter of 2019 and a record low of 5,489 million in the second quarter of 1987. Government spending refer to public expenditure on goods and service and is a major component of GDP. Government spending policies like setting up budget targets, adjusting taxation, increasing public expenditure and public works are very effective tools in influencing economic growth. Here's the part about the government spending of New Zealand. And about Malaysia decreased to 40,364 million in the second quarter of 2020 from 40,525 million in first quarter of 2020.
Hello everyone. So I'm gonna continue with the next exports and the national savings of the four countries, that is the Australia, the New Zealand, the Malaysia, and also the last one is the Cambodia. So let's begin with the first case, the next exports of the Australia. So let's take a an overview of the next export of the Australia. As we can see, in 2018, Australia exported 248 billions of dollar and imported 219 billions of dollar, resulting a next export to be positive of 28.7 billions of dollar, and that is a good signal for the Australia. So from closer view, we can see that the top exports of Australia are the coal briquettes, the iron ore, the petroleum gas, the gold, and the aluminum oxides. So, and also the top imports of Australia are refined petroleum, the cars, and the crude petroleum. And the regions the Australia export to are mostly to China, to Japan, to South Korea, and to India. So they export mostly to the Asia and just a little percentage to the United States, which consists of 9.71% billions of dollars. And however, they import mostly from the China and the United States. That is the difference. Let's from this number, this data has led us to a conclusion that this country, the Australia, is specialized in export raw materials for industrial and fossil fuels. Okay, let's move on to the second case, that is the New Zealand, the neighbors of the Australia, with different next exports. So in 2019, the value of exports of the New Zealand is 38.2 billion US dollars, is a 4.1% decrease from 2018 to 2019. And this is the result from the fact that the New Zealand dollar depreciated by 5.9% against the US dollar since 2015 and declined by 5% from 2018 to 2019. And take a look closer to the regions that the New Zealand exported value, that is to the Asian country, which take 58.3% of their exports quantity. Why 15.5% was sold to the Australians and another 11.2% worth of goods to the North America and a merely 9.9% to Europe and a very small percent to the Africa and the Latin America. Even though is a decline of is a decrease about 4.1% compared to the 2018. Its total during 20, its total export spending, its total exports value in 2019 translate to roughly 7.6 thousand for every resident in the New Zealand due to the population of 5 million people. Let's take a closer look to the products of exports of the New Zealand. As you can see that they focus mainly on the agricultural products and the beverage. As you can see that 27.9% of total exports of New Zealand products is dairy, eggs, and honey. So we can see that they specialize in the agricultural. The third case we're talking about is about the Southeast Asia, that is the Malaysia. So the Malaysia exports values in 2019 is 238.1 billion of US dollar. It's also a decrease compared to 2018. That is a 3.7% decrease because the because the Malaysian ringgit depreciated by 6.1% against the US dollars since 2015 and declined by 2.7% from 2018 to 2019. So the country-specific data show that 77.3% of products exported from Malaysia were bought by the China, the Singapore, the Hong Kong, the Japan, mostly the Asia. As you can see that 72.3% of the Malaysian exports by value were delivered to Asian country and just 11% sold to the North America and a 10.4% to Europe and very small percent were bought by other continents. Even though it's a decrease, a a 3.7 decrease in comparison to 2018, the the Malaysia of the Malaysia totals of exports value in 2019 translate to roughly $7.3 thousand for every resident in this country due to its population is about 32.8 million people. And let's take a closer view to a products of this country. As you can see that they focus mainly on the electrical machinery and other machinery products. As you can see that they specialize in industrial exports products. And come to the last case of the next export, we have the Cambodia, the neighbor of ours. As we can see that the Cambodia values of exports in 2019 was 25.2 billions of dollar, and that amount was an increase, a 98.2% increase from 2018 to 2019. And with the populations of $16.5 million, its exports value translates to $1.5 thousand for every resident in this country. And from the data shown in 2018, that 81%, 81.9% of products, exported products from Cambodia goes to the United States. And wow, as you can see, that for continental perspective, we can say that 38.7% of Cambodia exported by value was delivered to European country, while another 30.7% was sold to North America, and Cambodia also exported another 28.4% worth of goods to the Asia and very small percentage to another continents. And the top products of the Cambodian that is exported is the clothing and the handmade accessories, and also the jewelry and the gems and precious metals. So we have done the next exports of 4 countries, and we move on to the next part, that is the national savings of the 4 countries. Let's move on to the first case of Australia. So the Australian national saving has recently been around 20% of the GDP growth, which is under 6% of GDP net of depreciations. This is a short of national capital investment. The gap appears as an external deficit of 6% of the GDP. So a deficit at that level is when the terms of trade are at extraordinary high levels, would be a warning in the past. However, since it's a large financing strong investment, much of it total expand product productions of commodities demanded internationally. So it's not the prime concerns of today Australia's savings. We move on to the second part, that is the New Zealand. So in since 1999, the two key components of national incomes of the New Zealand was the employment income and the business profits, measured in current price, recorded little growth. Yet in spite of the sluggish growth in business profits, investment income remitted abroad increased. Moreover, while both dividends remitted out of the New Zealand by foreign investors and interest paid on money borrowed abroad increased, there was a drop in dividends earned by New Zealand companies from overseas investment. And as a result, national disposable income, which measure all income earned by New Zealand residents, decreased 0.6%. And as you can see, all the data here. The result has been New Zealand levels of international borrowing has risen from record level into new high. Net borrowing from the rest of the world can climb to 1,015 millions of dollars to 6.5 thousand millions, or 6.6% of the GDP. Now we move on to the third country, the Malaysia. So the national saving as a whole has plateaued, suggesting a reduced saving relative to GDP is an actual fail from 37.4% of GDP in 2006 to 29.4% in 2013. Investment has continued to increase, this reducing the saving investment gap. And come to the last case, we have the Cambodia. The Cambodia savings accounted for 24.2% of its nominal GDP in December 2019, compared with a ratio of 23.4% in the previous year. Cambodia's investment share of nominal GDP is updated yearly. So the latest reports, we see that the Cambodia GDP expanded to 7.1% in December 2019. So that is all for my presentations about the next exports and also the the, the national savings for the four countries. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm gonna talk about the tax revenues. The first country I want to mention is Australia. Total tax revenue collected in Australia increased a lot, from 528,000 in 2019 to 559,000 millions in 2019. It was driven by 26,000 millions, 8.4% increase in tax on income, profits, and capital gains, and 2,000 millions, 7.9% increase in tax on properties. Commonwealth government taxation revenues includes taxes received from other levels of government and public corporations increased 28,000 millions, 6.6% from 427,000 in 2019 to 455,000 million in 2019. And you can see the charts here illustrate Commonwealth government taxation revenues. The blue line represents for income tax leaves on individuals. The red one income tax leaves on enterprise, and the green one tax on production of goods and services. Second country, New Zealand. Tax revenue percent of GDP in New Zealand were reported as nearly 29% in 2019, currently to the worst World Bank collections of development indicators complies from officially recognized resources. New Zealand tax revenues percentage of GDP's actual values, historical data, forecast, and projection were sourced from the World Bank of August of 2020. The bar just here illustrate the tax declined remarkably to 2012 and then increasing incredibly. The third country, Malaysia. Malaysia's tax revenue was reported at 9,000 USD in March 2020. That records a decrease from the previous number of 11,000 USD for December 2019. Malaysia's tax revenue data is updated quarterly, averaging 4,000 USD from March 1980 to March 2020, with 161 operations. The data reached at all-time highs of 15,000 USD in December 2012 and record low of 857,000 USD in March 1922. The Malaysia tax revenues reached a peak at January 18, with 30,000 million. The last country, Cambodia's Cambodia tax revenue were reported at 320,000 USD in June 2020. Tax revenue reached peaks of 664,000 million at December 2019 and declined remarkably, and then rising and recovered again at April 2020 with 612,000 million USD. The second factor I want to mention is national debt. New Zealand. In 2019, New Zealand public debt was $60,000 million, had increased 2,000 million since 2017. This amount means that the debt in 2018 reached approximately 30% of New Zealand GDP's 1.75 percentage points from 2017, when it was 24% of GDPs. If we check the table, we can see evolution in New Zealand debt. According to the last data point published, New Zealand per capita debt in 2019 was $12,000 per inhabitant. Second country, Malaysia. Country official national debt was then at 50% of GDPs and so comfortably below the debt limit. However, taking into account all the debt obligations, the new government declared that the public debt could be anything up to 18% of GDPs. Malaysia's national government debt reached 197,000 USD in June 2020, compared with 197,000 USD in the previous quarter. Cambodia. In 2019, government debt for Cambodia was nearly 30%. Through Cambodia government debt fluctuates substantially in recent years. It tends to decrease through 2019 previous, ending at 29. The final factor, external debt. Australia external debt reached 1,000 USD in March 2020, compared with 1,628,000 in the previous quarter. In the latest report of Australia, current account records a surplus of 5.5 USD in March 2020. New Zealand external debt reached 191,000 USD in March 2020, compared with 184,000 USD in previous quarter. External debt in New Zealand increased to 302,000 millions in the first quarter of 2020. Malaysia external debt reached 2,332 USD in June 2020, compared with 2033 USD in the previous quarter. The data reached at an all-time high of 2,334 USD in June 2020. 2018, a record low of 100 USD in March 2009. Cambodia historic average 50,000 USD in March 2020, compared with 15,000 million in the previous quarter. And thank you for listening.